Thank you very much, Andre, for this very kind introduction and for the very, let's say, for the invitation. Well, it's indeed a great pleasure, 10 years after, to be back in EU Water Initiative celebration. Well, the good thing is, the first good news is it has survived for 10 years. So that is good and it's vital. People are still there, people are still doing it, and so that's a good news. I will give you some personal remarks over, let's say, over the past few years, how I observed what was going on. First is to stress this EU Water Initiative was a political initiative on the highest political level possible for the European Union and, for example, also for the African side, because it was signed up on heads of state level. And that was the time when water probably was on the highest level ever, let's say, at least in terms of the European Union. It was really the flagship of the European Union in Johannesburg. Of course, there was also energy, but the energy people had a little bit more problems because they didn't have their house that well in order than the water side, because we had the Water Framework Directive and the DG Development had their strategy very clear on water. So we had our house in order and could easily go out. So it was water and energy, but water was really the flagship, and the Water Initiative was the flagship initiative of the EU. What was the purpose of this one? The major purpose, I would say, was strategic coordination amongst the European donors, together with the partners in all continents. Well, at the beginning, of course, the focus was Africa, but we had the ECA, we had the Mediterranean, later came the Latin American, and a strategic coordination in order to achieve better the MDGs. And of course also the sanitation target, which we had achieved in Johannesburg with great efforts from the European Union. So that was, it was really a very political initiative at that time. And well, when I look 10 years back, Andre, into the meeting in Stockholm, well, the difference is from today, we had a number of African ministers lined up here on the panel, and we didn't have enough space for them to sit on the panel, and that's probably a difference of today. Some personal observations on the problems. The EU Water Initiative was basically putting in place the Paris Declaration before the Paris Declaration was done. And that was, of course, probably too early in that respect. So we were basically pioneers in this respect, because the EU, if you look at the EU side at that time, the EU spent, the member states and the Commission, well, correct me, Andre, if I don't remember the figure right, but I think the figure which we were drawing up at that time was 1.2 billion euros per year on water only. Commission and the member states. One of the achievements of the EU Water Initiative that we got this figure, because before it, nobody knew how much the European Union spent on it. And this 1.2 billion were largely spent, let's say, uncoordinated. Of course, coordination happened on national level, normal way, but not on a strategic level. But then I, well, observed that, of course, development policy is, and was, and probably still is, always a tool of foreign policy. And member states don't like to be coordinated on foreign policy by the European Commission or by anybody else. And that is one of the core underlying problems, what you face if you try to coordinate the big ones, but also the small ones, because they want to have their own choice of countries, their own priorities. And so the objectives what we were setting here with the EU Water Initiative are, of course, counter these, let's say, normal movements. But the same you observed with the partners. The darling countries in Africa, like, say, the 5-7 darlings, which received 80–90% of the funding, they, of course, were also not very keen on clever strategic coordination, because that was a threat to them, that probably their funding would be reduced and go to other countries which would also be in need. So this is probably some underlying problems. And then, of course, we had very suspicious also from some of the international banks and so on, which were scared, oh my God, what will happen if the EU finally gets its act together as the biggest donor? That was a threat to many people globally. So these were some of the underlying problems, and of course very pragmatic problems. From the Commission side, we never put enough resources, let's say on the coordination into a secretariat. That took far too long until significant resources were there. And then things like the water facility were put aside, so not under the initiative, which was basically an achievement of the initiative, but then it was not seen as an achievement of the initiative and not controlled by the initiative. So that is another, let's say, problem. But I don't want to get too long on this side. On the achievements, I think the EU Water Initiative can be proud because MCOW, I'm pretty sure, was put much faster together because of the EU Water Initiative. Because we pushed them like hell. We said we need a partner in Africa to work with. And so I'm pretty sure that MCOW wouldn't have been put that fast together and be operational without the EU Water Initiative. You can see in the early documents at the beginning, the MCOW was called African Ministerial Conference on Water. And then Andre and myself, we were the only ones who were allowed from the donor side in the internal meetings. And of course, then they grilled us how the European Union works. And one of the results, which is quite visible, also the way it's organized, is that they changed the name into African Ministerial Council on Water because they learned the European Union has Council of Ministers. So very small, let's say, very small hint on how close we were with them. The initiative has also achieved to mobilize much more funds for water, not only in the Commission, but also in the member states, if you would look at that. And another thing is, I know the European Investment Bank has put water much higher on the agenda, let's say after and because of the EU Water Initiative. And the water was much put higher on the political agenda, also in the member states. Yeah, and also in all the arena. That is also an achievement of the EU Water Initiative. And all the, I think, on all the dialogues, policy dialogues, also on the global level, I think the Water Initiative partners can be proud of that. What to do with this thing in the future? Is it still necessary, or is it better to stop after 10 years? Well, for me, if you look at the situation at the moment, that water really gets up the ladder globally at the moment, again, very much so. You see here in this meeting many more different stakeholders than 10 years ago. That is the reason why they all feel, okay, there is something with this water, and nobody really knows what to do with it. Yeah, you can see it in these type of meetings, what kind of, a lot of the old messages, a lot of insecurity from the different actors, and I think here the EU Water Initiative could really play a role to reach out and to different partners. For example, industry is very present here, big water users, not the water industry as such. Yeah, they have their role, they have to find their place, but the big water users, that could be new partners in the Water Initiative, because they seek for, let's say, for a role, they seek for advice, and they have a role to play, let's say, in the future in solving the water problems in developing countries. And also enlarge the subjects, what you're looking at. One very clear one would be climate change adaptation, a very hot issue in Africa, and very urgent. And a lot of the adaptation measures will be, of course, on the water side. And that is one thing where you could look at. Or the Nexus. Well, it was just the Sustainable Energy for All initiative was launched by the Secretary General. And so working alongside very closely with the energy people, because water and energy are very similar in a lot of solutions. And working alongside with the energy people, I think that could make a huge difference. And that could be a new way of also of working in the Water Initiative. But the key would be, and that, no, let me go back to one other issue. I think, well, we will discuss very soon what should follow the MDGs. Is it the SDGs, and how will that be? How will that relate to the MDGs? And all this political discussion will come. And the Water Initiative could play a real role to put the partners here together to form, let's say, the opinion of the water community and of all the different stakeholders in the water community. Because that discussion will start pretty soon and will be quite complicated, and water has to have a quite let's say, good voice in that, I would say. And there I can see a very clear political role. But in order to do that, I think what is vital is to revitalize the political support, that it doesn't stay, let's say, on the technical level. That you really vitalize the political support, both, let's say, Andre, from the European, in the European Commission, from the commissioners and the president, but also on the member state level, let's say, from their ministers, because most of the ministers who are in charge today, or I would say probably all, they don't know what that is. And a lot of, let's say, is also true for the, let's say, for the partners. So I think that is crucial, revitalizing this political support and this political momentum, what we had in the past, is absolutely crucial that this would work for the next, let's say, for the next 10 years. But as I see the momentum in the water sector as such, it's possible to mobilize it. Yeah, I think it's possible at the moment. And if you achieve that, it will be another good 10 years. So far, I think from my side, I can only say it's a pleasure to be here to celebrate with you, and I can only say I wish the Water Initiative another successful 10 years. Thank you very much.